So, so what is LD? So you've heard this term being thrown out here and there when talking about debates. So like the majority of NSDA debates, you're going to be debating a resolution or a topic about a societal issue. Lincoln Douglas is one-on-one, so you're not going to have a partner. It's just you versus your opponent. In Lincoln Douglas, you prepare your cases ahead of time, and you want to have one for each side of the resolution. And what's special about Lincoln Douglas is that the topics are sort of abstract or more with like moral leanings. So you're talking about how society ought to be in terms of like morals and ethics and values. So there are two different ways that you can debate LD. There's lay debate and circuit debate. So when you're getting into it, when you're first starting, you're definitely going to be doing lay debate. So what this means, they're just different ways of speaking and getting your points across. Lay debate is all about the persuasion, all about like speaking, getting your points across, and is sort of more like general type of debate, like you want to focus on the point itself. Whereas circuit debate focuses really on the technicalities of debate. There's a lot more like advanced techniques that we're going to go over in a later lecture. It's about getting as much information across as you can and speaking really fast. So as you get more into the whole debate world, you'll learn which format is most comfortable for you. Personally, I'm a lay debater, and this presentation will kind of focus on how to be good at that. So some examples of Lincoln Douglas topics in the past are states ought to eliminate their nuclear arsenals. In the US, colleges and universities ought not consider standardized tests in undergraduate admissions. And violent revolution is a just response to political oppression. So for all of these, at first it might seem a little strange, like how are you going to apply values and ethics to standardized testing? But there are a lot of different ways that you can look at these issues, and that's the interesting thing about LD. So where does the name Lincoln Douglas come from? So it's kind of a history of this. So there was a series of 7 debates between Abraham Lincoln and Senator Stephen Douglas when they were sort of debating the issue of slavery in America, where Douglas wanted to lift the slave ban in the northern states, and he was in favor of popular sovereignty, which is like the states should have their own say in like whether they want slaves or not. Lincoln questioned the moral iniquity of holding slaves, and that's kind of where the moral leanings of Lincoln Douglas debate came from. So their debates were structured kind of similarly to our debates. The Lincoln Douglas debates, like their speech times were much longer, but basically it holds the same format of going back and forth with a question session and your speech and your rebuttals. So why would you choose LD? So the thing about being on your own is that you have the freedom to debate the way that you want. So you can tailor your speeches and your cases to your own speaking style, and you just have that freedom of being by yourself and debating for yourself. The abstract resolutions with like an ethic or pathos appeal give you a lot of room to interpret the resolution in a way that'll fit the side of the case. So that can be really interesting if you choose to interpret it in a sort of different way. LD helps you build communication, research, and listening skills. The thing about LD is that it combines different like speaking styles and skill sets from all types of debate. So you have to be able to research and formulate your case. Then when you're giving your second speeches, you have to be able to quickly think on your feet and make arguments there. So it combines a lot of skills. And lastly, but not least, it's fun. So now let's start to get into what LD looks like. So the round structure, there are 5 speeches and 2 cross-examination periods. So the first speech is the affirmative constructive. So the affirmative speaker is the one who is like agreeing with the resolution or the topic. So they get the first word where they sort of present their take on the case and just read their points. And that is a 6-minute speech. So right after that, oh, forgot the times for the cross-ex. Each of these cross-examination periods are 3 minutes. So what that is it's just a questioning session. That, so for the affirmative cross-ex, the negation or like the other side will just be asking them questions based on what they read. And they'll have 3 minutes where just the neg asks the aff. And then right after that, you have your first neg construction, which is 7 minutes. So in this speech, the negation goes over their own case first. So they introduce new points. That's their pre-prepped case. And then for the rest of the time, they start forming refutations to the first points brought up in the 1AC. So after that, there's a cross-ex period where aff gets to ask neg, works very similarly. And then after that, you have 3 speeches. The 1AR, which is the affirmative's chance to refute what was brought up in this first claim, or first speech from the negation. Then negation's last speech is 6 minutes, where they have to tie in their closing words and refute everything that's been brought up. And then the affirmative gets the first and last word, where they have 3 minutes just to sort of tie it all together and sort of explain to the judge why they won. And then for round structure, wait, no, sorry. So both teams get 4 minutes of prep time in total, and they can use this wherever they want. Typically they use it after cross-ex and before their last rebuttal. And this is 4 minutes for each side, so there's going to be 8 minutes total, and debaters can use, like, they can prepare at the same time. So if the affirmative wants to use some of their prep time, the negation can use that time to prepare as well. So, yeah. So now we're going to get into the different parts of your LD case. So the first and arguably one of the most important parts of an LD case is your framework. So the framework is just sort of this, is like the value that is applied to the rest of the case. And it's read at the beginning of your case and sort of sets a structure or a direction for where you want the rest of your case to go. So there are 2 parts to the framework. There's the value and the value criterion. So your value is going to be like the standard or principle by which you evaluate your resolution or what you're trying to achieve. Typically, it's going to be abstract. So common examples are like morality, justice, or societal welfare. So it would be like your case is trying to prove that it is the most moral or most just take on the resolution. The value criterion is how you achieve the value. So it's a little more specific, a little more concrete, and typically is in the form of a verb plus an object. One common exception, this is one of the most common frameworks, is utilitarianism, which is basically the most good for the most people. Then for your verb and object format, you'll see stuff like protecting life or creating equality. So you have a fair amount of freedom with your value criterions as long as you can apply it to your case. So then in your cases, you're going to have, or when you're in a debate, you're going to have some conflicts with your framework and your opponent's framework. So there are some tips and tricks to answering this. So framework is pretty much the most important part of your LD case. So you want to win the framework debate, which is basically prove that your case fits the framework the best. So when you're weighing under framework, you want to isolate the winning framework, just say like, mine works the best because it fits the resolution the best, and sort of talk about why you are winning under their framework if you can't win the framework. So for example, say I was talking about justice and my opponent was talking about morality, and they won the framework debate saying that like justice is just like a form of morality. That's like a very basic way of how you might tackle that debate. So then if I wanted to win under their framework, I would just say my points still apply to morality and they do it better. Other tips for answering framework, you can attack the theory behind your framework, which gets a little bit technical. Basically, like if their author isn't credible or the theory sort of revolves around one premise and it isn't applicable to the case, you can sort of attack the technicalities of that. Or like if there are mechanical errors with their framework, you can talk about like it's not constructed correctly or this isn't framework. But that's not an issue that you'll come across super often, at least in your early days of debate. So the key takeaway with the framework is don't concede your framework unless you can work under your opponents. Like I said, framework is like basically what judges the entire LD debate. So you want to make sure you win. So building your case, it's pretty simple. Because the fun part of the debate comes like right off your feet where you're going back and forth with your opponent and it gets different every time. So when you're building your case, you obviously start with some research. When the topics come out, there are a couple channels that do, there are a couple YouTube channels that do these really in-depth analyses of the topic to sort of give you an idea. So once you've done a bit of general research, you go and start selecting your general points, just kind of like what you want to talk about, like just in a very like open term, because under your general points, you're going to be having subpoints. Like, for example, I'll go over, oh, sorry, I said that I was going to check the chat after each slide and I did not do that. I'm just noticing now, so let me check that right now. Oh. Okay, it looks like I cannot access the chat while I'm sharing, so I'm gonna go through all the questions at the end of the slide. Sorry for any confusion. And if I'm going too fast, please unmute and let me know and I can slow down. Yeah, sorry, I just can't access the chat when sharing the screen. So anyways, right, so once you have your subpoints, you're going to cut cards, which is basically finding evidence that go under your subpoints, and we'll go more in depth about what cutting cards means in a later lecture. So in your LD cases, just like at first, there's going to be very little of your own like opinions. It's going to just be like research and evidence tailored to fit arguments that you come up with. So another part of not your main case, but things that you want to have prepared are called blocks or extensions. So each topic is going to have a very common, very common like counter argument that's going to be brought up in almost every case. So you want to have pre-prepared like evidence to go against the points being brought up. And I'll talk more about this in a little bit, but the great thing about LD is that you can tailor your case to fit your writing style. So personally, I like having a bit of an introduction and conclusion to my cases, but the majority of my opponents don't have that. They just go straight into the case. So you have a little bit of freedom of how you want to go. All right, next slide. So cross-examination. Cross-examination is fun. It's, like I said, it's the back and forth question session. So there are a couple tips and tricks for asking and answering. So when you're asking the questions, you want to start with just some clarifying questions or defining terms, but you don't want to waste your time here. You only have 3 minutes and those go by super quickly. A tip or a trick that I would use is like if I was taking some time to sort of process the information and come up with questions, I would ask them like a clarifying question and then not pay attention and come up with my own questions while they're talking. But yeah, clarifying questions are helpful, but they do take a lot of time. So you want to point out holes in your opponent's logic. So if you can catch a contradiction where like they're saying something, but their case said something else, catching them and writing about them is going to be a powerful point. So when you're asking questions, you can sort of bias or like change the wording so that it favors one of your points. Like example of this, when I was doing the standardized test debate, my opponent asked me, a question that was phrased in a way that's like, why would you do this if this is true, referencing one of her own points. And that was a pretty good question that that stumped me a little bit. So that's a pretty good trick. Don't let your opponent stall for time. Your opponent's going to want to use up those 3 minutes and like try to get as much of their information across. So make sure you catch that when they're rambling, and call out unrelated answers, or like if they're going off topic and not answering what you asked, try to catch that and make sure that they're answering on topic. Now, to contradict everything I just said, answering. So you don't want to concede your points. If they, like, the person asking might try to sort of back you into a corner and try to get you to say something that might not be what you're trying to say. So kind of like going to the bottom of the slide, no questions are truly yes or no questions. Just make sure that you leave your answers fairly open and you don't say something like outright that could be used against you. So you want to be rambling and stalling for time, but also you don't want to be confusing. So stay on topic when you're answering your questions, but try to get as much of your information across in 3 minutes as possible. So this here actually applies to asking the questions too, but kind of a way of like backing your opponent into a corner, which you can do on either side, is ask, can you agree that if I prove blank, which is typically the value, like if my case supports the value best, I win this debate. If they say yes, you kind of, well, if they say yes, then they agreed to like a pretty simple premise, and you can use that in your last speech. And then here you can also add in additional information that strengthens your case. Refutation. So these are going to be your last 3 speeches, or well, last 2 for the app and the last negation speech. So in your refutations, you want to defend your own case first, because if you run out of time, it looks better if you have strongly supported your case rather than attacked all of your opponent's points. You obviously want to get to both, but defending your own case first is typically a good way to go about that. So you want to clarify your understanding of the points that were brought up. So a typical like sentence structure for this would be like, my opponent said this, just to kind of refresh the judge on the point that you're debating, and just kind of get across how you understood the point being said. So when you're answering arguments, there are a couple ways you can do it. There are 4 ways, more than 4 ways, but you can remember just general categories of answers by this acronym POT. So you can preclude, which isn't used super often, but saying like their argument can't work because of pre-existing conditions that like inhibit the ability for their argument to be practical. Outweigh is going to be your most common one. Oh, there's supposed to be a comma there. But outweigh basically talking about how like my argument does this better. So this can be in terms of probability, like the argument brought up is not probable, so it shouldn't be considered. Magnitude, like say if one person dies versus an entire country dying, you're going to say like the greater magnitude is like this, the case that supports like saving or benefiting the greater magnitude will be what you want. Time frame, whatever comes first, and reversibility. So if an action takes place, can it be reversed? So turns are basically, so there are a couple kinds of turns. There's your impact turn and not your turn. Your impact turn and what was the other one? Your link turn. So your impact turn, sorry about this, guys. Your impact turn is where you take your opponent's argument, then say that the impacts that they have, or like why their argument matters, say that instead of proving their point, it actually proves something that supports your case. An example of this would be, say, like, your opponent says something like, oh, if this happens, like all of humanity will be wiped out, and that's bad. Then you could take it and turn it around and say all of humanity will be wiped out, but that's actually good because it'll save the environment. So just kind of like taking their argument and then changing the connotation of the impact. And then link turns, not turn turns, are where you take like their reasoning and say like it kind of goes wrong here and it supports my argument rather than theirs. And then take out, this usually happens if like your opponent forgot to address something, just say like the argument is irrelevant to the debate now and can't be brought up again. All right, so if you came to yesterday's lecture where Alex was talking about the debate space, this matters a lot in Lincoln Douglas, especially with the whole morality value side of it. So this only applies to lay debate or lay Lincoln Douglas. That's going to be the version of the debate that you're going to get started with. So your points and your facts don't matter if you can't sell them. So you might have the best evidence you could find, but if you mumble it or if you get it across in a way that's not understood by the opponent or, more importantly, the judge, then they lose their power. So you want to be able to sell your points and like persuade the judge that it matters. You want to speak confidently and dynamically, just so that you're easier to pay attention to and like engage the judge and the opponent. Don't yell. It doesn't help you. You want to speak at like a presentable volume, but once you let emotions get into the way of your debating, then it's weakened your stage presence. Engaging with the judge, like eye contact. I do this thing where I talk with my hands. That makes you, it can help you like flow your points better. It can make you like easier to watch. And as an example, I'm going to go ahead and read a contention from my September-October speech. So a contention is just like an argument. So I cannot get started without putting on the obligatory debate blazer. All right, so I'm just going to read the tagline, which is this top part here, just like the main point. I'm going to read my first card or the evidence, and then I'm going to go over to this little conclusion bit that I do. Oh, where was it? All right. Contention 1, standardized tests are unfair towards socioeconomically disadvantaged families. Reardon 16. Of the 1,000 poorest districts in the United States, only 68 have test scores at or above the national average. Likewise, of the 1,000 most affluent districts in the United States, only 16 have mean test scores at or below the national average. The correlation between higher test scores and economic advantage proves that the scores don't provide a fair judgment for a student's abilities, but rather how rich the families are and their ability to pay their way into college. So, this blazer's getting hot. So that was just an example of how I read my speech. I don't know if you picked up on it, but there were certain words that had like certain connotations that I would stress to kind of prove a point. So that's pretty much the lecture. The main takeaways are that Lincoln Douglas is a one-on-one value debate. Framework is your best friend. You want to win the framework debate. Persuasion wins you the debate, and you're never wrong. So what I mean by this is like, even if you're not so sure about one of your points, defend it to the end of the debate, because your ability to persuade and sell your points is going to be what wins you the debate. So before we get into a brief activity, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everyone. All right. So I'm going to go over the questions that are in the chat right now. I'm so sorry I didn't get to those after the slides, like I said. Thought it was going to work out differently. All All right, so I'll just go down, and then if you guys have any more questions, feel free to bring them up right now. So what is utilitarianism? Utilitarianism is a pretty common value criterion, which is basically like the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. So you'll kind of see an example of this in the activity that we're doing, but basically like my case is the most moral because it like saves the most amount of lives, or it creates the most equality or something like that. All right. Does the judge tell you who wins the framework debate? Who wins the framework before the debate, or do you have to concede? Okay. So the framework debate isn't really its own thing. It's still possible to like agree to your opponent's framework and win the debate. So the judge will not tell you who wins the round right after, or at least they're not supposed to. So the framework debate, basically like the debater itself is going to claim that like I won. They're never going to say like my opponent won. But yeah, that's just kind of like a looser term. So like winning the framework debate just basically means like you're agreeing to like judge your case by which is the most moral or which is the most just or whichever framework you choose. All right. Can you paste does channels onto chat? Oh, wait, Kessler, what do you mean by this question right here?
You were talking about some channels that went into the debate typing, the debate types. Yeah. So I just wanted to ask, could you paste those channels onto the chat?
So I'll paste those in the Google Classroom right after this meeting. But yeah, there are a bunch of great resources online, and thank you for reminding me to do that. I'll get those for you. Can you just interrupt them if they're rambling? Yes, and it's a power move. Sometimes I'll try to talk over you, but yeah, just kind of like, if they're going on and on and on, like assert dominance, don't try to yell over them, but just remember that when you're asking your questions, you're the one asking the questions. So yeah. How do you respond to the can you agree if I prove this question? Yeah, so if you're confident in your ability to prove that that like you're gonna win that, you can go ahead and say yes, but it's typically risky. The best way to go about it is just like it's not that simple, and then start rambling kind of, or like yeah, just main way that I would tackle it is like there's multiple ways to interpret like moral or just, and like we can't like make that distinction right here in the beginning of the debate. So yeah, a refutation is just like a is going to be your counter argument. We kind of went over that. Yeah, so can you bring any notes to the debate? Yes. So you're going to have your case in front of you all typed out, like that document that I showed you. I actually had that in front of me while I was debating, and your opponent will as well. So you don't have to memorize your first few speeches. You have just handed me a weapon. Okay. All right. Ellen, did that answer the question sort of? All right. Oh, and I don't know if you guys have gone over this yet, but one of the debate lectures is going to go over flowing, which is where you take your own notes during the debate. So we don't have much time, so I'm not really going to go over that. But basically, yeah, you're going to have your case in front of you. It's great. All right. So do we have any other questions? Cool. All right. So we have about 20 minutes here to get into a brief activity. I'm going to share my screen again. And so what I'm going to have you guys do is sort of do a bit of a mock debate and practice arguing like morals or values and kind of asking each other questions. So. All right, I'm sure you guys have all heard of this, but the fabled, come on, trolley problem. So I have changed the like standard trolley problem just a little bit, just kind of give it a variation to give you guys more points and just have like a way to discuss more. So I'm going to read this out to you. There is a set of trolley tracks in your town, which are famous among the youth for being a fun place to play. Where the track splits, there is a newer track that is almost always the path that the trolleys go through, and an older track that is still functional but rarely ever used. Mothers advise their children to only play on the latter track to avoid getting hit by the train. However, kids are rebellious. One fated day, 5 children are playing around on the new tracks, despite their parents' wishes. And on the old track, there's a singular obedient child playing safely and playing alone. So you're walking by the tracks when you hear the stomach-dropping sound of a trolley hurtling towards the poor children. At the moment, it's headed straight, heading towards the 5 naughty kiddos. At the crossroads, that's you, you notice a lever. So you can pull the lever, and it gives you a choice. You can either pull the lever, which redirects the trolley to the old, unused track and the 1 kid, or you could do nothing, not get involved, and let the trolley run into the 5 children. What do you do? So here's what our activity is going to be. I'm going to split you guys into 2 discussion groups. Breakout room 1 is going to be the affirmative, and breakout room 2 is going to be the negation. So I'll give you guys about 10 minutes just to discuss. And I want you guys to come up with framework and I would say 2 basic arguments. Obviously, there's no evidence that you can point out. So when we come back together, just have, we'll just do a value. So I'll hop back and forth and kind of explain what a value is, but your value can be something like, my take on the resolution is the most moral or the most just, or it like helps the most people. And I want you to have a couple arguments on why you should do what you're doing. So I don't think we're gonna have time for a rebuttal, but if we do have time, we're gonna do a quick cross-sex practice where you guys can just go ahead and go back and forth and just ask each other questions. So it'll be pretty loose format-wise. I just want you guys to get discussing. So what the resolution is when faced with a situation, you ought to pull a lever. So the affirmative group, you guys are going to be pulling the lever and hitting the 1 kid. The negation group is saying that you should not pull the lever and go straight into the 5 kids.